Hello and welcome everybody. Oh wait, I think the live stream is starting. Let's see here. Okay, now we are live. Hello everyone and welcome back. If this is your first time, welcome. If you have been here before, well, welcome back. Basically, it's a super pleasure to get a chance to be able to meet and vibe with everyone. If you didn't get a chance to see me before, my name is Will Zapata, here out of Rhode Island, working here in the Northeast when it comes to renewable energy and solar. All right, gotta fix ourselves, making sure that we're good. Basically, the reason why we wanted to start this page was because we wanted to create an environment where people can come in, they can learn more about renewable energy for their home. They don't have to worry about any hard sales tactics. They don't have to worry about, hey, like they gotta feel like they gotta make a decision today. This is strictly for us to be able to share information as to the ever growing and changing industry known as solar. Basically, for today, we want to get into more details as to how does solar work, right? Because solar works differently for different people depending on what your needs are, right? Depending if you're in the West Coast, depending if you're in the East Coast, you may have different expectations of what you think solar energy is. And we want to be able to, break down a couple of myths when it comes to solar. We want to be able to give you more detailed information. And then most importantly, and the reason why we started this page was to be able to arm you with information, right? I'm a firm believer that we are all going to go solar one day. It's just a matter of time, but we want to make sure that we have as much information as we can when we do make that decision. For most of us, especially here in the United States, our home is going to be our biggest investment. And anytime we do a home improvement project or we do any kind of construction project, which solar is, we want to make sure that we are making the right decision, right? We want to make sure that we're getting the correct information. We want to make sure that it's something that's going to be applicable and it's going to work for us, right? So, with that being said, we want to get into how does solar work. Now, the very simple way, I'm going to give you the scientific way, right? It might be a little bit boring if you don't know, but essentially, the solar panels are going to be capturing energy from the sun, right? And then what happens is that that energy that is collected, it is then converted into alternative current, and then it is pushed back out into the grid. That's right. Sometimes we have a misconception where we assume that, well, I have solar panels and the solar is what's powering my home. In most cases, that is not actually true, right? So, what tends to happen is that during the day, right, everybody's going to be part of this program, usually called net metering. And what that means is that during the day, when let's say maybe you're at work, maybe the kids are at school, maybe your consumption is lowered, and we're getting the most amount of sun exposure, right? That means that most of that energy that your solar is producing is going to be pushed out into the grid, right? And what tends to happen is that the utility company is going to use it. They're going to send the energy to some of your neighbors. They might be using it to send the energy to some of your local businesses. And then at night, when you need that power or when the sun is not out, right, and generating any energy, you're tapping back into the grid, but you're getting a dollar for dollar credit. Now, I do want to emphasize that it does not work that this way across the entire country. I would highly recommend to make sure that whatever solar program or information you're looking at, it is tailored specifically to the area that you're in. For example, if you're in California, most new systems now are going to require a battery backup because they have something called time of use. But for the most part, and just to keep it general, in the rest of the country, you're going to be able to have something called net metering, right? So if you're producing 1 unit of electricity, that means you're going to be able to then get credit or equal credit of equal value for that same unit of electricity, right? Now, typically, when you are thinking of converting your home over into solar energy, right, you want to make sure that you're getting all the power that you need, because the last thing that you want is to, let's say, have a system that's too small and maybe it's not giving you all the power that you need, even if that may not be powering your home, but you still want to be able to either offset or ultimately eliminate your utility bill, right? And the better the production, getting all the energy that you're consuming is going to be very important. Now, before you decide on what system you're going to get and, maybe what company you're going to go with, I highly recommend do a lot of research, right? Look at few different options, figure out what makes the most sense for you. But also, maybe do some of your own research and some of your own digging when it comes to your consumption. Nobody knows your home better than you, right? You're living there, all the time. Maybe you've been in the home for a couple of months, but maybe you've been in the home for a couple of decades, right? And you know your patterns. You know exactly what your usage is. You know what your plans are for your home. And you want to make sure that you're tailoring your system according to what your usage will be, not just today, but in the future as well. So now, typically, here in the Northeast, we'll just use it as a very simple example. The utility company will provide you with all the power that you've been consuming for the last 13 months. Now, you want to take into account that solar is typically going to have a 1 to 2 year cycle, right? So I would suggest, if you can, reaching out to the utility company and getting an average for the last 3 years, right? Better be safe than sorry. And most utility companies will accept you obtaining or you creating your system based on the last 3 years average. The reason why you want to go as far back as 3 years is because sometimes patterns will change, right? So maybe 1 year you just moved inside the house, right? And maybe you weren't there maybe during the summer months, or if you have electric heating, you wasn't there during the winter months, right? And now that you've had a full year, you'll notice that your electric consumption has changed. Maybe you're new to the home and you want to make some changes, right? Heat pumps, mini splits, these things are becoming more and more popular as we're looking for solutions to get out of fossil fuels, right? Ultimately, why we're looking to go solar or energy or use some kind of renewable energy is because we want to be able to have freedom in the way that we power our homes. And if you're thinking about making any kind of changes like an electric heating, or I'm sorry, if you're thinking about a heat pump, if you're thinking about mini splits, and another thing that's becoming more popular is electric vehicles. You want to take all that into account when you're assessing what your electrical capacity is going to be, right? If you're thinking about, hey, I'm going to probably do that in the next year or two, I usually like to I ask families whenever I sit down and I meet with them, like, hey, what do you plan on doing, or what changes do you plan on making to your home, right? Do you plan on having a finished basement where maybe people are going to live in or even rent out? Do you plan on getting heat pumps? Do you plan on getting mini splits? Do you plan on getting an electric vehicle, right? Do you plan on having more people move in? Because these changes, right, they're going to impact directly the way that solar works for you. You might start off thinking, well, hey, let's just say, for example, I'm using 100 hours a year. Solar and energy is not measured that way, it's measured in kilowatts, but just to make it simple, if you're using 100 hours of electricity a year, right, but then people are going to move in and maybe that's going to go to 120, 130, you want to be aware of that to set the right expectations, because your whole goal with net metering is to be able to offset or eliminate what you're paying to the utility company and ultimately be able to have much more control. A lot of the reasons why we want to be able to, let's say, move into our own home is because, well, we want to be able to predict what our payments are going to be, right? We want to be able to lock in, at today's rates, because history has shown us that yesterday is a little bit less expensive than what tomorrow is going to be, right? We get our home because we want to be able to build equity, right? So that's the same thing that solar is going to be able to add to your home. You'll be able to get a much more predictable rate, right? You'll be able to increase the value of what your home's worth, and then you'll be able to protect yourself against future inflation, right? One of the things that we've seen, especially those of us that have, lived through COVID, is how unpredictable the world can be. Before we knew it, we had a pandemic that was happening, and the whole world was shut down, and then it completely changed the way that we live. Now we have more people that are working from home. Now we have people that, maybe they were using more power during that time. And then after we saw the ramifications of the pandemic and at how high our utility rates, and not just our utility rates, but just how high things got, right? I mean, I know I noticed house prices shot up after the pandemic, right? Gas, electricity, eggs, and so many things have gone up after the pandemic. And what I like to tell families is that going solar and doing it the right way that is specific to you, it can protect you against those unforeseen changes, right? Because if you have a predictable rate, that allows you to plan a bit better for your future. Again, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't have a crystal ball. But if you know that, for example, before you were paying $200 and now with solar, maybe it's $150, maybe it's $100, and that's what you're going to be paying, now that's able to give you the opportunity to properly prepare yourself. It allows you to build defenses for your family, right? It allows you to maybe put a little bit of extra cash away, right? Maybe you can use that money and redirect it to another bill, right? Maybe you can use it to pay for an extra family vacation, right? But the whole idea is that by you being able to convert your home over into solar power, you're going to not just be protecting yourself, but you'll be protecting your family. You'll be, getting an asset on your home, right? And in some cases, that asset will pay for itself, right? With a couple of years of you having a fixed electric rate, as maybe some of your neighbors are experiencing higher and higher utility bills, yours might be at a much more stagnant, much more fixed rate. I always like to let families know if you get the opportunity and you can lock in your rate, take full advantage of that, right? Because I know myself, right? And for most people, this is the case, right? Maybe we like randomness and excitement and, when we're going out and we're having fun, but when it comes to the money that comes out of our pockets, we want it to be predictable, right? That's why we bought the home in the first place, is so that way we can have a predictable payment. We know exactly what we're paying for, and there's a light at the end of the tunnel, right? Up until solar energy, we've never had an end date where we wouldn't have to pay a utility bill, right? Again, we get a house because we know, well, if I live here, if I pay off my mortgage, I don't have to pay from where I'm living, right? And solar allows you to have that same opportunity. If you're able to lock in your rate, maybe you pay for your system cash, maybe you finance it. Nowadays, more and more third-party ownership or PPAs or lease options, they give you an opportunity where you can lock in your rate. So, you can protect yourself from the rate increasing in the future. And then at the end of the term, if you paid for your system, well, it's paid off. You don't have to keep paying for the power that your system produces, right? Especially if you're able to almost ensure that you're getting even a little bit more power than what your system is or what your current usage is. That allows you to protect yourself and maybe store a bit more energy for future use. Now, something else that sometimes we tend to think, well, if I get solar panels, do I have to get a battery, right? And that's necessarily not always the case. Sometimes with net metering, the utility company will be your own backup battery, right? In the sense of, if some of us are old enough to remember, AT&T had something called rollover minutes, right? And essentially, what that allowed you to do is that whatever you didn't use, you built up credits for the future. That's the same thing that solar allows you to do, especially with net metering. What you can do is you can go ahead and maybe store an extra 5, 10, 20% of extra power, right? Maybe a year. And maybe during the winter months for here in the Northeast, or maybe you're thinking about increasing your usage in the future, it allows you to save that and bank that so that way you don't have to draw on the utility company. Now, if you don't have a backup battery, right, the utility company is always going to be there, right? It doesn't mean that you are off the grid. Basically, what it means is that, again, you're relying on the sun to produce the power that you're consuming. Anything that you don't consume, it gets stored in the utility for you to use it at a future rate. And what's great about net metering it is that it's a dollar for dollar credit, which means that again, if you're paying $1 for electricity, the electricity that you produce is going to be $1 value, right? Wouldn't that be great if we were paying a dollar for electricity, right? And I mean, believe it or not, in some cases that could happen, right? There are families that are able to see, 6, 7, 8, 9 months without seeing a utility bill. Because one of the other things that, we tend to think is like, well, if I go solar, I no longer have a utility bill. And that's not always the case. Sometimes what happens is that you have to either produce enough power, right, or have your system on long enough, right? That's why we mentioned earlier that solar is going to have a 1 to 2 year window, because depending on when you get installed, you may not build up enough credits yet, right? Sometimes, especially in the Northeast, you're going to get the most amount of production during the summer months, which means that that's when you're going to be able to overproduce in some cases and use it and store it for the winter months. Sometimes it may not be the complete elimination of your utility bill. It's just going to be a drastic reduction, which I'm hoping maybe your electric bill will be $1 or even less, right? Maybe maybe the utility company will owe you credits because you're just overproducing, right? The whole idea is to be able to use solar to better power your home, better predict what you're going to be paying for electricity, and then give you much more control and flexibility over something that up until now we've never really had that opportunity to do, right? So if you do decide that you're going to get a backup battery now, right, you want to make sure that it's actually going to be of use, right? Because batteries, it doesn't mean that, hey, you're going to produce enough energy that, let's say, if you run out of power, you're going to be able to power your entire house. Usually that's not the way that it works. The battery backup, it's going to be used for essentials. If you're in an area or you're in a situation where, let's say, hey, you run out of, well, you don't run out of power, but let's say you lose power just due to storms, due to the weather, right? Very frequent and for long periods of time, having a backup battery is going to be very helpful, right? Maybe you'll be able to power a few appliances. We've heard of families, especially down south, maybe in Texas, where due to storms, unfortunately, their food goes bad. They end up not being able to have power to do just very basic things, and it's going to be much more common and recommended that, hey, you should have a backup battery, right? Now, do your research, because backup batteries can add an additional cost to your solar system. Typically, it's not like you get the solar and the battery comes with it, right? You can probably package it together, right, as one product or service, but you want to make sure that this is something that you're going to ultimately need. Even if you do have a backup battery, right, it doesn't mean that, hey, I'm not connected to the grid. No, in most cases, you're going to always be connected to the grid. The only difference is that if you do happen to run out of power, well, now you can draw on your battery backup in order for you to, again, maybe just do the essentials. Maybe it's just keeping the refrigerator on, right? Maybe you're using it to microwave some food, right? Or maybe like, you have a child or an elderly person that might need electric heating, and that allows them to stay warm in the wintertime. Part of the reason why, especially in the Northeast, you don't get completely off the grid is because, heaven forbid that something happens, especially during the wintertime, and, we don't get a lot of sun during the wintertime. You want to be able to still keep your home warm, right? Those of us that maybe use wood stove or pellet stoves, great backup. I'm a big proponent of have as much backup, have as many ways to keep yourself warm and safe, right? But if you're looking at solar to solely do that, you might find that, hey, either I don't have enough power, or the batteries are just not storing all the power that I need, right? So the other time you may want to be able to consider a backup battery is if you're in a situation where you have a time of use difference, right? For those families that are in the West Coast, like California, you might find that, hey, I need to have a battery backup because, let's say, between the hours of 4 and 9, my electric rates are going to skyrocket, right? So, the power that I'm producing is not going to cover the increased usage. And what families in California do now, and this is all because of the change in solar in that area, is that they'll have a backup battery so that way between the hours of 4 and 9, instead of getting the power from the grid where it would cost them more money, they're going to use the power that they stored. Right? So it doesn't mean that they're completely off the grid, but at least they're able to protect themselves from those increased rates during those peak hours, right? Because between 4 to 9, that's when we're doing, that's when we're back home. We're getting dinner ready for the kids. We're just doing things that we do at home, right? Doing laundry. Maybe we're just relaxing. And because the utility company is the last monopoly in the United States, they take full advantage of that, right? They know that, hey, you need the power during this time, so I'm going to jack up the rates. That way they get the biggest ROI during those hours. And obviously us as homeowners, right, we want to make sure that we're protecting ourselves. So if you're in California or you're in an area where you have time of use, maybe a backup battery is something that you may want to consider. Okay. Now, in solar, they are quite a bit of myths that happen, right? And I just want to go through them. Maybe one or two myths that we tend to see when it comes to solar power, right? And the first thing is like, hey, solar only works if I live in sunny states, right? And hey, as a person that is here in the Northeast, I would love to live in a sunny area. I love the sun. I'm a big proponent of the warm weather. I love it. But if we're not living in a sunny area, it doesn't mean that solar doesn't work for you, right? It just means, again, you have to be able to plan. Typically, right, let's just say you live somewhere in Florida, right? Maybe if you needed 10 panels to give you all the power that you need, in the Northeast you might need 13 or 14, right? Because we're taking into account the winter months. We know that it's not going to be as sunny, but even on cloudy days, even in the winter time, you're still going to be able to generate some kind of power. That's why it's very important that you understand that solar has a 1 to 2 year window, because if, let's say, you get installed in the winter time, let's say, hey, your system is getting installed in November, December, January, those are months where you're not going to get the most amount of sun exposure, right? Your system will produce, but it's not going to be nothing compared to the summertime, right? And as we get into the spring and the summer, you can expect your system to start to produce a lot more power. So again, if you don't live in a sunny area, it doesn't mean that it won't work for you, right? I like to always look at Germany as a great example because they are pretty far up north, and Germany has a lot of solar. It's the way that they get their power, they try to be as green as possible, right? So they have a lot of solar panels that they use for homes, for businesses, just for as many things as they can, and they're still able to get great benefits from it, right? The difference is that, again, compared to a sunny area, it's going to take more panels in order for you to get more power. So if you're ever thinking about, hey, I want to get solar for my home, it may not work, I encourage you to look at the roof, right? Look at your roof and see where the snow melts the fastest, right? That's a great indicator to see where your home gets the most amount of sun exposure. Even here in the Northeast, we get plenty of sun, right? Especially for those of us that have great south-facing roofs, right? And you'll notice that, like, hey, maybe the front of your house, the snow melts right away, or you'll notice it like, hey, my driveway is always clear of snow. That's probably an indicator that you get a lot of good sun in that area, right? So yes, just because you don't live in a sunny states or in a sunny area, it doesn't mean that solar isn't for you, right? For the most part, if you're able to get good sun exposure, if you're clear of any shade, solar is gonna always make sense to you, right? It just has to be something that you do your research for, and you understand that solar is an investment. Like any investment, it is not gonna pay back right away. It's gonna take its time, but with like any investment, right, the longer you have it, the more you're gonna be able to benefit from it, right? So I hope that cleared up that myth, right? Again, just because you're not in a sunny area doesn't mean that solar won't work for you, right? The other myth that we got is like, well, I don't have a lot of money. Thank goodness, because solar might actually make more sense for you if you don't have a lot of money, right? In most areas across the country, if let's say like you can't finance it or pay for it cash, they have a great, what we like to call a power purchase agreement, or they have like what they call a lease, where you're able to basically swap out the utility company as your power provider and then get it from solar. Especially here in the Northeast with more and more third party ownership or power purchase agreements or leases, that's allowing you where you not only can get a reduced rate, but in some cases you can lock that rate in. Anytime I'm meeting with a family, my goal is to be able to, hey, I want to make sure that I lock in those rates for you. I want to make sure that you know exactly what you're paying for. It's predictability, right? As everyone's electric bills might go up around you who hasn't gone solar, you know that, hey, you're protected. I got a fixed rate, and every single year, your system is going to be worth more and more to you. So, yeah, because you're wealthy, it doesn't mean that you can't go solar, right? Some people will qualify for a tax credit if you decide to own or finance your system. I highly recommend that you speak to whoever does your taxes or a CPA, right? Make sure they're certified and just ask them like, hey, am I going to be able to qualify for this? It's called an ITC credit, right? Am I going to be able, and I think I used the word credit twice, but are you going to be able to qualify for it? And, if you can, awesome. Maybe owning your system might be a great way to go. But if not, or you're unsure, hey, then getting the power purchase agreement or the lease or a third party ownership option might work perfectly for you. And again, here in the Northeast, you might be able to get the same benefits as if you finance your system, especially if you can lock in your rate, right? What I want to be able to do is, again, right, guys, I do appreciate you taking the time to meet with me. The whole goal of this is to be able to create an environment where you're allowed to ask questions. You can, feel free to, leave some comments. You can go ahead and, start to plan for how you're going to power your home. You can, basically protect yourself against future cost of electricity increasing on you, right? That is the whole point of being able to utilize solar power, is so that way you're like, hey, I'm protecting myself, I'm hedging my bet against inflation because I know that everything is going to go up, right? You don't have to live too long to realize that, especially for those of us that are thinking about owning a home. I would highly recommend that, hey, you look how solar accessible is your house, right? If maybe you're buying a home that has solar, I would make sure to ask, hey, what kind of program did they have? How is it working? The name of the company that they went solar with? Because in more cases than not, solar is going to be much more beneficial for you to have on your home, and solar is going to become much more ubiquitous within the United States. I can't tell you, as somebody that's been just about a decade in the industry, how many more homes I'm seeing that have solar. And every single year, that number is increasing rapidly, right? Because as we start to see our neighbors go solar, it piques our curiosity. And as the utility rates continue to go up, right, with no consideration, we need to figure out a way that we can protect ourselves. We need to figure out a way that we can build equity into our home. We need to figure out a way that we can also, hey, put in some future wealth for the next generation, right? Just imagine how much how more helpful it's going to be for the next generation, right? If you decide like, hey, I'm going to leave my house to my kids, at the same time that you're paying off your mortgage, you're paying off your solar. And when you decide maybe, hey, I'm going to pass on the home to my children, now they don't have a mortgage and they don't have a utility bill. It's a huge benefit for those of us that are planning to, own a home in the future. It's a huge benefit for those of us that want to leave something behind to our children and create some kind of legacy where, their money can go back to their use, right? Because as I mentioned before, right, the reason why I got into solar was for freedom, right? It was for the freedom to be able to work with as many people as I could. It was for the freedom to be able to work where, from people all over the country. It was the freedom to work as long as I wanted to, and it's also for the freedom of not having to be stuck to the utility company, right? Nobody likes to be anchored down, having to pay rates and dictated by other people. And the utility company has been merciless at essentially, dictating what our prices are going to be for solar. So If you end up seeing this video at a later time, please feel free to send us, a message. We'd love to be able to get more families, more people just involved in spreading the word as to how solar can work, right? Because solar is a great tool if used correctly, right? So I do appreciate you taking the time to, spend the day with me or the evening, depending on where you're at, right? And I look forward to be able to continue to provide value, continue to provide insight on how solar works and how we can better power our home. So thank you, everybody, and I look forward to seeing you again. Have a great day and take care.